Hello, everyone. It's Bill Younger again for Physics Solutions. We're still working on the vector addition series. This is vector addition part 4, and we've now basically given the initial vector problem where we were adding 4 vectors, A, B, C, and D. We've now added, we've taken A and broken it down into its components. That was part 2. We've taken vector B, broken it down into its components. That was part 3. And now we're going to do vector C. So let's start off by sharing my screen so that you can see the problem we're working on. So again, we're working on what is the resultant R, which equals A plus B plus C plus D of the vectors A, B, C, and D, defined as A equals 20.00 newtons at 30 degrees, B is 14.14 newtons at 45 degrees west of north. C is the one we're doing today on this one, and it's 50.00 newtons at 231.34 degrees. And then finally, D, the vector is 25.00 newtons in magnitude at a compass heading of 106.26 newtons. So now let's stop sharing and we will go to my document cam so that you can see I've already written down the vector B and RC and drawn the components, or actually drawn the axes. So let's look at that now. So this is the 50 Newton vector. It's at 231. So 0 degrees would be pointing that way along the X direction. 90 would be that way. 180 would be pointing that way. So we go beyond 180, 53.1, 53, or excuse me. Yes, 51.34 degrees past. So we're going to say it's roughly this angle right here. That right there is 53.3 or 51.34, excuse me. You want to write that 51.34 degrees. This is vector C, and its magnitude is 50.00 newtons. And in this case, I want to find the X and Y components. Again, I've been recommending we imagine walking from the tail of the vector to the head of the vector, and do so by walking along coordinate axes directions. So if I start by going off to the X direction, I'm going to the left, which is a negative X direction. So I'm going to indicate that by walking this way. And that's my C sub X. And since I drew it as a vector, I'll put a vector symbol of it. Now I'm going to walk this way, which is parallel to the negative Y direction. And that'll be my Y component like this. Now it should hit right there. Obviously, I didn't hit it, but the main thing is you see what I'm talking about. So there's the vector C sub Y, and that is supposed to be the two components of our vectors that I'm morphing together to make it look proper. So now, as I told you before, I want you always to think about writing out the trig functions. First, don't worry about trying to figure out which one's the X, which one's the Y, and just jumping into the step, but rather write your trig functions and then solve them. So I want to say the cosine of 51.34, which by the way is related to one of our special triangles, specifically the 3-4-5 triangle. The cosine of 51.34 is actually equal to adjacent over hypotenuse. This is the angle, this is the side touching the angle, so that's the adjacent. So that would be CX over the hypotenuse, which is the magnitude, which is just plain C. And similarly, the sine of 51.34 degrees is opposite, which is this angle, this side over here, over hypotenuse, which is C. Now, if I multiply both sides by C, the C over here would cancel out with this C, and then I'd just be left with C times the cosine. If I multiply this one by C, this C would cancel out, and I'd be left with C times the sine. So that tells me that C sub X, which again is negative, so I got to force that. I'm going to put a negative, and I'm going to say 50.00 newtons times the cosine of 51.34 degrees. Now, if you remember our 3-4-5 triangle, 53.14, or excuse me, 0.34, 51.34. Oops, keep writing that incorrectly. I'm just trying to make it kind of big, but then I'm not paying attention to what I'm writing. So this is the 51 15.34. That's the bigger of the two angles. So that's opposite the 4. This is the 3, and this is the 5. So you can tell that the cosine of 51.34 is 3/5. So this part right here is 3/5. Of course, you don't have to do that. You just punch it in your calculator, but you can see by doing that, that clearly you're just going to get negative 30.00 newtons for the x component. And then C sub y, again, that's also negative, so I'm going to force it, 50.00 newtons. That 50 did not look very well, that 5 didn't. Okay, times the sine of 51.34 degrees. We can see the sine of 51.34 is 4/5. Again, not required, just something that's nice for those of you playing with trig and learning that kind of stuff now. So in this case, I'm going to get the 5 canceling out with the 50, making just 10, and 10 times 4 is 40. So I'll get negative 40.00 newtons. And in this case, we got both the x and y components as negative. And that, of course, is a property of quadrant 3, because obviously quadrant 3, if the vector leaves the origin and goes out some way, then clearly it's going to have to go in the negative x direction and then the negative y direction as well. So that's why we got both of them. Again, don't try to think of it that way. Try to build the components each time. Don't try to think of which function gives you x component, which function gives you the sine component. Do it each time by either writing this out and then solving, or working it out and solving on the fly. But preferably while you're working with learning, you want to just go ahead and do this whole process. So we now have the vector components, and I would like you to try to practice one. So what you should probably do right now is pause the video and then see if you can get the same answers I did for CX and CY. Then when you come back and you start playing, you will see the problem that I made up for you to try. And here it is. So this one I'm going to ask you to try. Let's take vector V4, and I'm going to say it is 28.28 newtons, and it's at negative 135 degrees. Okay, negative, remember, means measuring it in the clockwise direction from the positive x-axis. So it'd be negative 90 and then another 45 degrees here. So I want you to find the x and y components of that. Pause this now and then try to work it out. When you come back, you can watch me put the well, actually I'll be creating the next problem, and then I'll come back and put the x and y component answers. So V5 is actually, no, I'm only gonna do one this time. So go ahead and pause it, work it out, see if you can get it. Here's what my answers are. So pause it before you see them. So V4 sub x is going to be, again, a negative, but in this case, I got 20.00 newtons. And V4 sub y, again, is a negative. And in this case, I got negative 20.00 newtons, which is what you expected when I told you this 135 is basically 90 plus 45. So that is another part of this video series down. Hopefully that helped you make some sense of how to add vectors. And we will start up in a few minutes with another video. Have a good day.